Yo everyone, we're back with this chapter 2. If you're ready to listen, sit back. With communication that blocks compassion. Do not judge, and you will not be judged, for as you judge others, so you will yourself be judged. In studying the question of what alienates us from our natural state of compassion, I have identified specific forms of language and communication that I believe contributes to our behaving violently towards each other and ourselves. I use the term life alienating communication to refer to these forms of communication. Moralistic judgments. One kind of life alienating communication is the use of moralistic judgments that imply wrongness or badness on the part of people who don't act in harmony with our values. Such judgments are reflected in language such as, "The problem with you is that you're too selfish. She's lazy. They're prejudiced," or whatever. It's inappropriate. Blame, insults, put-downs, labels, criticism, comparisons, and diagnosis are all forms of judgment. The Sufi poet Rumi once wrote out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right-doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. Life-alienating communication, however, traps us in a world of ideas that about right-doing and wrongdoing, a world of judgments. It is a language rich with words that classify and dichotomize people and their actions. When we speak this language, we judge others and their behaviors while preoccupying ourselves with who's good, bad, normal, abnormal, responsible, irresponsible, smart, ignorant, etc. Long before I reached adulthood, I learned to communicate in an impersonal way that did not require me to reveal what was going on inside of myself. When I encountered people or behaviors I either didn't like or didn't understand, I would react in terms of their wrongness. If my teachers assigned a task I didn't want to do, they were mean or unreasonable. If someone pulled out in front of me in traffic, my reaction would be, "You idiot." When we speak this language, we think and communicate in terms of what's wrong with others for behaving in certain ways, or occasionally what's wrong with others for not understanding or responding as we would like. Our attention is focused on classifying, analyzing, and determining levels of wrongness rather than on what we and others need and not getting. Thus, if my partner wants more affection than I'm giving her, she is needy and dependent. But if I want more affection than she is giving me, then she is aloof and insensitive. If my colleague is more certain about details than I am, he is picky and compulsive. On the other hand, if I am more certain about details than he is sloppy and disorganized. It is my belief that all such analysts of other human beings are tragic expressions of our own values and needs. They are tragic because when we express our values and needs in this form, we increase defensiveness and resistance to them among the very people whose behaviors are of concern to us. Or, if they do agree to act in harmony with our values because they concur with our analysts of wrongness, they will likely do so out of fear, guilt, or shame. We all pay dearly when people respond to our values and needs, not out of a desire to give from the heart, but not out of fear, guilt, or shame. Sooner or later, we will experience the consequence of diminished goodwill on the part of those who comply with our values out of sense or either external or internal coercion. They too pay emotionally, for they are likely to feel resentment and decreased self-esteem when they respond to us out of fear, guilt, or shame. Furthermore, each time others associate us in their minds with any of those feelings, we decrease the likelihood of their responding compassionately to our needs and values in the future. It is important here not to confuse value judgments and moralistic judgments. All of us make value judgments as to the qualities we value in life. For example, we might value honesty, freedom, or peace. Value judgments reflect our beliefs of how life can best be served. We make moralistic judgments of people and behaviors that fail to support our values. Value judgment. Violence is bad. People who kill others are evil. Had we been raised speaking a language that facilitates the expression of compassion, we would have learned to articulate our needs and values directly rather than to insinuate wrongness when they have not been met. For example, instead of violence is bad, we might say instead, I am fearful of the use of violence to resolve conflict. I value the resolution of human conflict through other means. The relationship between language and violence is the subject of psychology. Professor O.J. Harvey's research at the University of Colorado. He took random samples of pieces of literature from many countries over the world and tabulated the frequency of words that classify and judge people. His study shows a high correlation between the frequent use of such words and incidences of violence. It is not surprising to hear that there is considerably less violence in cultures where people think in terms of human needs than in cultures where people label one another as good or bad and believe that the bad ones deserve to be punished. In 75% of the television programs show during hours when American children are most likely to be watching, the hero either kills people or beats them up with violence, typically constitutes the climax of the show. Viewers, having been taught that bad guys deserve to be punished, take pleasure in watching this violence. At the root of much, if not all violence, whether verbal, psychological, physical, whether among family members, tribes, or nations, is a kind of thinking that attributes the cause of conflict or to wrongness in one's adversaries, and a corresponding inability to think of oneself or others in terms of vulnerability, what one might be feeling, fearing, yearning for, missing, etc. We saw this dangerous way of thinking during the Cold War. Our leaders viewed Russians as an evil empire bent to destroy the American way of life. Russian leaders referred to the people of the United States as imperialist oppressors who were trying to subjugate them. Neither side acknowledged the fear lurking behind such labels. Making comparisons. Another form of judgment is the use of comparisons. In this book, How to Make Yourself Miserable, Dan Greenberg demonstrates the humor and insidious power that comparative thinking can exert over us. He suggests that if readers have a sincere desire to make life miserable for themselves, they might learn to compare themselves to other people. For those unfamiliar with this practice, he provides a few exercises. The first one displays full-length pictures of a man and a woman who embody ideal physical beauty. By contemporary media standards, readers are instructed to take their own body measurements, compare them to those superimposed on the picture of the attractive specimens, and dwell on the differences. This exercise produces what it promises. We start to feel miserable as we engage in this comparison. By the time we're as depressed as we think possible, we turn the page to discover that the first experience was a mere warm-up. Since physical beauty is relatively superficial, Greenberg now provides an opportunity to compare ourselves on something that matters: achievement. He resorts to the phone book to give readers a few random individuals to compare themselves with. The first name he claims to have pulled out of the phone book is Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. Greenberg listed the language Mozart spoke and the major pieces he had composed by the time he was a teenager. The exercise then instructed readers to recall their own achievements at their current stage of life, to compare them with what Mozart had accomplished by age 12, and to dwell on the differences. Even readers who never emerged from the self-induced misery of this exercise might see how powerfully this type of thinking brought compassion both for oneself and for others. Denial of responsibility. Another kind of life-alienating communication is the denial of responsibility. Life-alienating communication clouds our awareness that we are each responsible for our own thoughts, feelings, and actions. The use of common expression "have to," as in there are some things you have to do, whether you like it or not, illustrates how personal responsibility for our action is absurd in such speech. The phrase makes one feel as in "you make me feel guilty" is another example of how language facilitates the denial of personal responsibility for our own feelings and thoughts. In her book, The Eichmann in Jerusalem, which documents the war crimes trial of Nazi officers Adolf Eichmann, Hannah Arendt quotes Eichmann saying that he and his fellow officers had their own name for the responsibility-denying language they used. They called it Parke. I don't know. It's not loosely translated into English as the office talk or bureaucrates. I don't know. For example, if asked why they took a certain action, the response might be, "I had to." If asked why they had to, the answer would be superiors, orders, company policy. It was the law. We deny responsibility for our actions when we attribute their cause to vague impersonal force. Vague impersonal force. I cleaned my room because I had to. Our condition, diagnosis, personal or psychological history. I drink because I am an alcoholic. I hit my child because he ran in the street. The action of others. I hit my child because he ran in the street. The dictates of authority. I lied to the client because the boss told me to. Group pressure. I smoked because all my friends did. Entitled. Institutional. Policies, rules, and regulations. Gender roles, social roles, and age roles. I hate going to work but I do it because I'm a husband and a father. Uncontrollable impulses. I was overcome by my urge to eat the candy bar. Anyways. Once during a discussion among parents and teachers on the dangers of a language that implies absence of choice, A woman objected angrily. But there are some things you have to do whether you like it or not. I see nothing wrong with telling my children that there are things they have to do, too. Asked for an example of something she had to do, she retorted, "That's easy. When I leave here tonight, I have to go home and cook." I hate cooking. I hate it with a passion, but I have been doing it every day for 20 years, even when I have been as sick as a dog, because it's one of the things you just have to do. I told her I was sad to hear her spend so much time of her life doing something she hated, because she felt compelled to, and she hoped that she might find happier possibilities by learning a language of NVC. Well, I am pleased to report that she was a rapid student at the end of the workshop. She actually went home and announced to her family that she no longer wanted to cook. The opportunity for some feedback from her family came 3 weeks later when her 2 sons arrived at a workshop. I was curious to know how they had reacted to their mom's announcement. The elder son sighed. "Marcel, I just said to myself, thank God." Seeing my puzzled look, he explained, "I thought to myself, maybe finally she won't be complaining at every meal." Another time, when I was consulting for a school district, a teacher remarked, "I hate giving grades. I don't think they are helpful and they create a lot of anxiety on the part of students, but I have to give grades. It's district policy." We had just been practicing how to introduce language in the classroom that heightens consciousness of responsibility for one's action. I suggest that the teacher translate the statement, "I have to give grades because it's district policy," to "I choose to give grades because I want." She answered without hesitation, "I choose to give grades because I want to keep my job," while hastening to add, "But I don't like saying it that way. It makes me feel so responsible for what I'm doing." "That's why I want you to do it that way," I replied. I share the sentiment of French novelist and journalist George Bernanos when he says, "I have thought for a long time now that if someday the increasing efficiency for the technique of destruction finally causes our species to disappear from the earth, it will not be cruelty that would be responsible for our extinction. And still less, of course, the indignation that cruelty awakens, and the reprisals and vengeance that it brings upon us. But the docility, the lack of responsibility of the modern man has base, subservient acceptance of every common decree. The horrors that we have seen, the still greater horrors that we shall presently see, are not signs that rebels, insubordinate, untamable men are increasing in number throughout the world, but rather than that there is a constant increase in number of obedient, docile men. Other forms of life alienating communication. Communicating our desires as demand is another form of language that blocks compassion. A demand explicitly or implicitly threatens listeners with blame or punishment if they fail to comply. It is a common form of communication in our culture, especially among those who hold positions of authority. My children gave me some invaluable lessons about demands. Somehow I had gotten it into my head that as a parent, my job was to make demands. I learned, however, that I could make all the demands in the world, but I still couldn't make children do anything. This is a humbling lesson in power for those of us who believe that because we're a parent, teacher, or manager, our job is to change other people and make them behave. Here were these youngsters letting me know that I couldn't make them do anything. All I could do was make them wish they had through punishment. Then eventually they taught me that any time I was foolish enough to make them wish they had complied by punishing them, they had ways of making me wish I hadn't. We will examine the subject again when we might differentiate requests from demands, an important part of MC. Life alienating communication is also associated with the concept that certain actions merit rewards, while others merit punishment. This thinking is expressed by the word deserve, as in he deserves to be punished for what he did. It assumes badness on the part of people who behave in certain ways and calls for punishment. To make them repent and change their behavior. I believe it is in everyone's interest that people change, not in order to avoid punishment, but because they see the change as benefiting themselves. Most of us grew up speaking a language that encourages us to label, compare, demand, and pronounce judgments, rather than to be aware of what we are feeling and needing. I believe life alienating communication is rooted in views of human nature that have exerted their influence for several centuries. These views stress our innate evil and deficiency and a need for education to control our inherently undesirable nature. Such education often leads us for questioning whether there is something wrong with whatever feelings and needs we may be experiencing. We learn early to cut ourselves off from what's going on within ourselves. Life alienating communication both stems from the support hierarchical and domination societies, where large populations are controlled by a small number of individuals for their own benefit. It would be the interest of kings, czars, nobles, etc., that the masses be educated in a way that renders them slave-like in a mentality. The language of wrongness, should and have to, is perfectly suited for this purpose. The more people are trained to think in terms of moralistic judgment that imply wrongness and badness, the more they are being trained to look outside themselves to outside authorities for the definition of what constitutes right, wrong, good, and bad. When we are in contact with our feelings and needs, we humans no longer make good slaves underlining. This is how we get out of this bullshit system. Just take notes now. It is our nature to enjoy giving and receiving compassionately. We have, however, learned many forms of life-alienating communication that leads us to speak and behave in ways that injure others and ourselves. One form of life-alienating communication is the use of moralistic judgment that imply wrongness or badness on the part of those who don't act in harmony with our values. Another form of such communication is the use of comparisons, which can block compassion both for others and ourselves. Life-alienating communication also obscures our awareness that we are each responsible for our own thoughts, feelings, and actions. Communicating our desires in the form of demands is yet another characteristic of language that blocks compassion. And we get to here. And now y'all will just hear me in the next video, hopefully I can get some donations, because you know your boy trying to be a farmer and stuff, be sustainable. But you know, at least I'm helping you guys learn stuff, and I want society to grow and, you know, love each other like this book. But peace, yo.